What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 meta decks for the competitive June 2021 format. There are so many products coming out in June that it's crazy, right? We have Lightning Overdrive at the end of this week, we have the Egyptian God Structure decks a few weeks after, and at the end of June, we have King's Court, which is a set that we honestly don't know anything about at the time of recording this video, aside from some Queen's Knight, King's Knight retrains, which is fantastic, but we don't know if that set's going to be a dud or if it's going to be the next format warping super threat. We'll just have to see. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to be covering the top decks going into the month of June. I think we're going to bundle in Lightning Overdrive as well, since Lightning Overdrive is at the beginning of June, and we have some ideas as to what some of the best decks are going to be coming out of it as we take a look over at the OCG. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. So kicking things off at number 5, we have a deck that's most likely going to be a top 2 or top 3 contender, but its track record leading into June has not been the best. But if we take a look over at the OCG and some of the new support the deck receives from Lightning Overdrive, that is going to take it to the next level, and that deck is of course Drytron. Now, Drytron came out of the gate swinging when it was initially released, but from limitations on the most recent ban list, most notably to hits such as Union Carrier as well as cards such as Ben 10, the deck did suffer some hits, and some of the other top decks were able to take over because the deck wasn't as consistent as it once was. However, Lightning Overdrive is going to change that entirely thanks to the release of 2 new cards in particular, the Diviner of the Heralds, which is just an incredible starter card for the deck, and we also have Drytron's insane Xyz boss monster in a ritual-focused archetype, Drytron Moo Beta Fafnir. If there was like a custom card that could have been perfectly designed for the Drytron archetype, it's Moo Beta Fafnir. This card is incredible. It does everything you could possibly want for the Drytron deck, and it's really what's going to bring the deck back into competitive contention. Remember, people in the TCG love their combo decks, and a lot of people were on Drytron before the hits happen, and so if there's an excuse for people to go back, they are going to take it. These cards now enable the deck to be almost at full power aside from the other hits such as Ben 10, but being able to go off and build your incredibly powerful boards with Herald of Ultimateness to be able to negate almost everything your opponent has. You can play copies of Eva to get multiple cards to your hand to feed for the Ultimateness. This deck can even search Herald of the Orange Light to insulate you from your opponent's hand traps and make it so that your board is not going to die to anything like a Nibiru. The deck is just crazy. It's super strong, super consistent, and that's why it's seen so much success in the OCG. It's already seen success in the TCG. The hits to the ban list put it in check, but I think Konami is going to want to make this a big selling point, which is why I have Drytron on this list. As I already said, I'm almost certain Drytron's going to become one of the top 3 decks of the format, but the reason I didn't want to put it up there immediately is because its track record leading up to this point has not been the greatest, because there are other decks in its place, and until people figure out the best way to build and compose the Drytron strategy, people are going to have to take some time to figure out what the best approach is when you look at it in the context of the rest of the metagame. So for the time being, I am going to put it in at number 5, but don't be too surprised if July rolls around and this deck is the number 1 or number 2 deck. And it probably goes without saying, but if you're going to be purchasing any Lightning Overdrive cards or anything else coming out this month, be sure to use my affiliate links down in the description. You get 5% off for absolutely free just for using the link. And if you're spending a few $100 on those Diviners and those Moo Beta Fafnirs, then that 5% can actually go a long way. But coming in at number 4, we have a deck that is still just tearing it up at the top tiers of competitive play, and that deck is Prank Kid. Now, Prank Kid, I would say, is actually on a bit of a decline. I think it was much more hyped going into May, and I think now that the meta has adjusted to account for Prank Kid being at the forefront, that's kind of knocked this deck down a peg. However, that hasn't taken away from the power that this deck possesses, because it still has a 59% win rate on the online environment. It's still been tearing it up at Remote Duel Extravaganzas and all of the larger events and even smaller events as well. If you go look at some top cut deck lists, you will see Prank Kids absolutely everywhere, and that's because it's such a consistent deck, being a 1-card starter sort of deck that allows you to go into a full Prank Kids combo, and just the way it's able to play and interact with some of the top decks of the format has made it a very viable contender. Prank Kid can just spiral out of control very rapidly, and if you're not able to stop that initial normal summon, or if you're able to just pretty much blow them out at some given point, then Prank Kid will take over the game because its resource generation is crazy. The amount of fusion plays and link plays it can do can make it close out games much more quickly than you might expect, and it's really not a surprise that this deck has been at the forefront of the metagame for the last several months. One of the things I also really like about Prank Kids is that it seems like it's a bit of a safe deck, considering we have a ban list coming out here in July, and while it is one of the strongest decks, I just don't exactly exactly see a hit to it necessarily. We have decks that are higher on this list that are much more problematic, and decks that are going to get much stronger as the new support gets released over the month. So I think Prank Kid is going to remain a top 5 deck for June, but once the new support starts to come out, I think it might slowly make its way down the list a little bit, making it even safer from getting hit on the ban list. That's also just purely my opinion. I obviously can't read Konami's mind, and they just might decide to hit something for absolutely no reason at all, but it doesn't really feel like a deck that needs a ban or a limitation of any sort. That being said, however, Prank Kid still packs an incredible punch, and so for those reasons, that's why we have Prank Kid coming in at number 4. Now, coming in at number 3, we have a deck that actually has been on the rise over the past month, and this is actually a deck that has been terrorizing the OCG format, and not necessarily everything the OCG translates here to the TCG, but with some new support coming out in Lightning Overdrive, I definitely think that's going to change, and that deck is Brigade. More specifically, the Brigade Zodiac variant, because that seems to be the most popular of the bunch, but the Brigade cards are just incredible. Now, Brigade's always been a good deck, right? We've talked about it in the top 5 budget decks before, which we'll be covering tomorrow, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But we also have talked about it in the context of it being a deck that is going to be a threat in the future, and that's for several reasons, right? When we look at Lightning Overdrive and the brand new Bear Bloom that's going to be released, the Link 2, this allows you to now search your Brigade Revolt Trap card, which is kind of like a soul charge for the archetype that allows you to immediately link up into a Link 4 Shurag to have a non-targeting banish during your opponent's turn, but also just replenishes all of your resources because you get to trigger a bunch of the Brigades that you already summon, such as your Farigite, such as your Nerval, and that allows you to sculpt your hand a little bit and prepare yourself for the next turn. The Brigade Zodiac deck is very efficient in how it utilizes its resources, and it's a very mid-rangey sort of deck. It can play combo, but I would say it's actually more of a control deck more than a combo deck because it's fighting for the board, and realistically, once it gets control of the board, it's going to be very difficult for you to find a way to claw yourself out. Most of the time, this Brigade Zodiac deck is able to set up an Appaloosa Bow, the Goddess and Ancient Warriors Double Dragon Oath Link 2, which is a bounce, plus a Brigade Revolt, which then means they have a non-targeting, non-destruction banish during the opponent's turn, but then it also gives them more resources, which means on the following turn, they can most likely link up into something like an Axis Code Talker and kill you on the crackback. If you've been paying attention to any of the recent extravaganzas or any of the more notable tournaments that maybe are above the local level, you will notice that Brigade has been having a serious impact in the competitive metagame, and very much a disruptor because the metagame had been ultimately solved up until this point, but this was even pre-Lightning Overdrive. This is before the deck gets access to one of its better cards, and so once we get to Lightning Overdrive, I think you can expect to see a lot more Brigade moving forward. I mean, hell, we already saw people playing Lyrilusk Brigade leading up to this, and that deck was already fine. It wasn't a top 5 contender, I would say, but it was a decent strategy, maybe at the tier 2-ish level, that was able to compete because it was able to lock people out with the Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds, thanks due in part to the Cimoooooooo Bird of Divinity. And so the fact that it even has that as an option, and now we've seen the deck almost just evolve into a different variant, shows how versatile and flexible the Brigade engine is, and shows why it can be a very strong contender in this particular format. So for those reasons, I have a lot of high hopes for this deck, and maybe I'm overhyping it a bit, but I think that the numbers don't lie here, and we can expect to see a lot of Brigade moving forward. So for those reasons, that's why I have Brigade coming in at number 3. But coming in at number 2, we have everyone's favorite fusion floodgate monster, and that deck is, of course, Shaddoll. Now, one of the reasons why this deck has managed to be so strong is because with all the combo decks running around, Winda is a very serious answer and a very problematic threat in this particular format. Anytime we're super combo heavy, Winda can be a problem. Think back to when we were playing in Orcust format, and Winda could just lock out games by itself. That hasn't changed all that much because Winda is still an incredibly powerful card, and because of Rise of the Duelist, and because now we have Shaddoll Schism, Winda is now even easier to make now more than ever. Every single individual card in this deck just like generates you advantage. Think of how many cards in this deck just give you a +1 on activation. Magical Meltdown, Alistair the Invoker, you know, Nadir Servant, the list goes on. And so you have a very, very hyper consistent deck with a very solid game plan, and because you have a way to effectively lock your opponent out of the game before they even have a chance to play, without necessarily jumping through 500 hoops by playing a Magic combo deck, it's a deck that's a little bit more simplistic and linear in its game plan, but is still just as effective and deadly as a result. This deck boasts a 62% win rate in the online environment, and if you've been paying attention to the extravaganzas, this deck is still everywhere because Winda is such a powerful card. Now, again, similar to Prank It, I think this deck is in a bit of a decline, and it's not nearly as popular as it used to be because as a result of it being in the metagame, people are taking the necessary steps to incorporate the appropriate cards that deal with Winda. You're seeing a lot more cards such as Dark Ruler No More, even in the main deck at times, cards like Forbidden Droplet, just so many different ways that the deck can actually be stopped. We're even seeing people main deck spell and trap removal specifically just to stop something like Schism, and I guess you could also say the Prank Kid spell by extension because those do have to be activated in the main phase. So if you have a quick play spell and trap Disruptor, you can stop them from getting to the Winda, and that's going to allow you to then combo off. But typically when people stick a Winda, that means that they are going to win the game. Win is in Winda's name. So for those reasons, I mean, the deck is just incredible. It has been tearing it up for the past several months, and until we get to more of a slower format, because I think as long as these combo decks are going to remain at the top, I think that's going to motivate a lot of players to want to stick on this Invoke Shaddoll strategy. So for those reasons, that's why we have Invoke Shaddoll coming in at number 2. The deck has a 62% win rate and has been doing absolutely wonderful. Now, there are still plenty of other decks that we're just not going to have time to cover in this video. Eldritch variants are still running rampant and are still constantly evolving past the 15 other ways you can play Eldritch. Dinosaur decks are still devastatingly powerful and are tearing up these other decks left and right, but there's one deck in particular we still haven't covered for our number 1 meta deck of the June 2021 competitive format, and if you haven't already figured it out, it's Dragon Link. It has a 63% win rate. The deck is just so resilient. It can play through so much disruption. The boards are just really not matched by any other combo deck out there, and because the deck and the engine is so recurable and is able to really just play through and can just deal with almost anything, it seems like, there's a reason that this deck has been the number 1 deck, not just of June, but for the past several months. We've talked about how one-card combos are the name of the game. Look at Prank Kids, look at even Brigade, but also Invoke Shaddoll. But this deck, Dragon Link in particular, I think just takes it to a completely different level because so many times you can just play these one-card combos and every other card in your deck is just an extender to play past your opponent's hand traps, to play past any of their disruption, and if you're able to get to that end board, you're most likely going to win the game because most of the time players are just not prepared to deal with a Hieratic Seal of Heavenly Spheres, a Borreload Savage Dragon, a Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, and also any sort of shenanigans with like the Dragon Maid cards such as Chamber Dragon Maid, Searching You, Tidying. That's just too much for most decks to deal with. And what's so incredible about Dragon Link specifically being the best deck, and I think one of the reasons why it is the best deck, is that even if the opponent uses all the resources and does manage to crack through that board, it sometimes isn't enough because on the follow-up, you may have a Chaotic Ruler, the Chaos Dragon, in your graveyard that can recur itself from the grave. You may have a Levianeer in your hand that you search from the prior turn, or have a way to get to it on the next turn that can just blow your opponent out like that. The deck has so many threats that makes it so overwhelming to deal with, and then if the turn passes back, even if you did manage to crack the board, the deck can easily go into a Borreload Dragon and just OTK you anyway. The deck is just phenomenal. It's resilient, it's robust, and it seems like it can just do everything you would want as a combo player in piloting a deck like this. There's a reason it's been the best deck for the past several months. There's a reason it's been the best deck for like 8 of the last 12 months because the deck is just able to continuously adapt, and I honestly think that when we get to the July ban list that this deck is not going to survive. So a bit of a word of caution there that if you are thinking about getting this deck in paper to play in any sort of remote duels or maybe even in-person locals, because I do know some of those are coming back, just be mindful that you may only get to play this deck for about a month before it suffers a very serious hit or two, because I think Konami's going to want to push Lightning Overdrive and their other newer products and make it so that people aren't able to play some of their older cards because they usually have a tendency to do that, but that's just obviously my opinion. Dragon Link, it's no surprise, it's the number 1 deck. It's been the number 1 deck, and I'm very curious to see as we enter July if that's still going to be the case. Will Drytron ascend to the throne? Will Brigade ascend to the throne? We'll just have to see, so be sure to subscribe and stick around next time to see what's going to happen in the July 2021 format. But guys, that's it for me. Be sure to let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you all so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. Be sure to use my affiliate links down in the description if you plan on purchasing any cards as a result of watching this video. video to get that 5% off. And if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon for exclusive early one-day access to both the Yu-Gi-Oh! Progression series and the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Thanks so much again, and we will see you next time.